My daughter-in-law called me a beggar on a Wednesday afternoon in front of 3 of her friends, not quietly, not accidentally, not in the heat of a moment she immediately regretted. She said it deliberately, with the particular confidence of someone who believes the person they are speaking about cannot hear them, or if they can, lacks the standing to respond. She was wrong on both counts. Monday, I was standing in the hallway of the apartment building on Creston Avenue in Cincinnati, Ohio, the building where my son Marcus and his wife Diane lived in Unit CB, holding a container of soup I had made that morning because Marcus had mentioned on Sunday that he had been fighting a cold. I had taken the bus. I had climbed 3 flights of stairs. I was 70 years old and I had climbed them without difficulty because I walk every morning without fail and have done so for 22 years. I had raised my hand to knock on the door of CB when I heard Diane's voice through the wall, clear enough to hear every word. The walls in that building have always been thin. I know this because I own it. Baines, she shows up with food like we don't have money, Diane was saying, and her friends were laughing the way people laugh when someone says something slightly too sharp and they are not quite comfortable but also not quite willing to be the one to object. Always with the soup, always with the little containers. Like a beggar bringing offerings. Honestly, I don't know how Marcus stands it. She's been living off his goodwill for years. And living off his goodwill. I stood in that hallway with the soup container warm in my hands and I breathed slowly. And I made a decision. I did not knock. I went back down the 3 flights of stairs. I took the bus home. I put the soup in my refrigerator. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought carefully about what I had heard, about what it meant, and about what, if anything, I was going to do about it. And then I called my property manager, not to do anything drastic, not yet, simply to confirm something I had been meaning to check for several months, the status of the lease for Unit CB on Creston Avenue, its renewal date, and the current below-market rent I had been quietly subsidizing for 2 years because my son lived there and I loved my son and had not wanted to make things difficult. The lease expired in 63 days. I thanked my property manager. I made a cup of tea. I looked out my kitchen window at the Cincinnati afternoon, and I decided that it was time for Diane to understand something about the building she lived in. I am so glad you are here with me today. Please stay until the very end, because this story has layers, and the final one is the one that matters most. Like this video if it speaks to you. And please tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. I read every single comment, and knowing how far these stories travel is something I carry with me. It means everything. Bonjour. My name is Margaret Elise Creston. I am 70 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Harmon Street in Cincinnati, Ohio. A building that I also own along with 4 others in the Cincinnati metropolitan area because I am a woman who has spent 43 years making careful, patient, unglamorous decisions about property. I want to tell you who I am before I tell you what happened, because who I am is the reason what happened went the way it did. I grew up in Cincinnati. My father was a maintenance worker. My mother cleaned houses 3 days a week. We were not poor in the way that breaks people. We had what we needed. But we were poor in the way that teaches you, permanently and without exception, the difference between owning something and renting it. Parents rented their entire lives. Every decision they made was subject to someone else's decision about the property they lived in. I watched that my whole childhood, and I made myself a promise at 16 years old that I would own something before I was 40. I owned my first property at 31. I was working as a bookkeeper for a commercial real estate firm. Entry level. Nothing glamorous. And I had been saving for 9 years with a discipline that my colleagues found baffling and my mother found admirable, and my then husband Gerald found occasionally excessive. Gerald and I divorced in Ichenjubite Julseri when I was 38, amicably and without lasting damage, and he will tell you to this day that I am the most organized person he has ever known. He means it as a compliment. It is the first property was a 4-unit building on Creston Avenue. I bought it in Ichenjubite Battersus for $82,000, with a down payment I had saved over 9 years. I named the street my management company after because the address felt like a beginning. It was. Over the following 4 decades, working first as a bookkeeper and then as my own company's financial manager, I acquired 4 additional properties. I was never reckless. I was never flashy. I bought when prices were reasonable and the fundamentals were sound, and I could see clearly what a building needed and what it would cost to provide it. I hired good people to manage the properties because I understood that the skill of acquisition and the skill of management are different things, and that acknowledging this is not weakness. I retired from active bookkeeping at 62. My property income had exceeded my salary for 11 years by that point. Retirement was simply the acknowledgment of an arithmetic fact. I live modestly. I take the bus. I make soup. I wear comfortable shoes, and I do not own a car because I live in a city with adequate public transportation. And I did not survive 43 years of careful decisions by spending money on things I do not need. This modesty is frequently misread. Diane misread it comprehensively. I need to tell you about Diane because she deserves to be understood fully, rather than simply condemned. Diane is 39 years old. She is the daughter of a family with, as she has mentioned on numerous occasions, a certain position in Cincinnati's professional community. Her father is a retired cardiologist. Her mother chairs committees. Diane herself works in marketing for a firm downtown and is good at her job. I know this because Marcus has told me, and Marcus does not offer praise carelessly. Manja. She is also a person for whom the visible markers of success matter enormously. The address, the furniture, the clothing, the restaurant, the car. These things speak to her in a language she has spoken since childhood, and she reads them fluently and constantly, and evaluates people through them the way some people evaluate through character, and some through kindness, and some through intelligence. By her metric, I did not register well. I arrive by bus. I bring soup in reused containers. My clothing is good quality, but not fashionable. My apartment on Harmon Street is comfortable and filled with books, and has a kitchen I have cooked in for 15 years, but does not have the renovated surfaces and statement fixtures that Diane considers the baseline of a respectable home. She had, in the 8 years she had been married to Marcus, developed a view of me that I was aware of, without having had it stated so directly until the Wednesday afternoon in the hallway. Living off his goodwill. Marcus has never given me money. I have never asked Marcus for money. I have never needed Marcus for anything financial in my life, and I did not intend to start. What Marcus gives me is his time and his company and his phone call every Sunday, which is what I value from him and the only thing I have ever wanted. Linger. But Diane had constructed a narrative. The elderly, bus-taking, soup-bringing mother who depended on her son's patience, and she had been living inside that narrative comfortably for years. I had never corrected it because it had never required correction. It required correction now. I did not act immediately. I want to be clear about that because the timing matters, and I want you to understand why I chose the pace I chose. 63 days remained on the lease for Unit CB. I spent the first week simply sitting with what I had heard, not rehearsing responses, not planning speeches, not nursing the anger into something larger than it needed to be. simply acknowledging that I had heard it, that it had hurt me, because it had, the beggar comment specifically, which touched something about my parents and their rented lives that I had not expected, to be touched, and that I needed to decide what kind of response reflected who I actually am rather than the worst version of what I felt in the moment. Belonged, I called my son's wife a beggar. Let me be honest about what I heard and name it without softening. That is what she called me. No, and I am a woman who owns 5 properties in Cincinnati, Ohio, including the one she sleeps in every night. The gap between those two facts was going to close. The question was how and in what spirit and with what outcome for Marcus, who loves his mother and loves his wife and deserves to not be destroyed by the collision. Marcus is the reason I was careful. He is 43 years old, a structural engineer, a good man who inherited his father's steadiness and his mother's attention to detail and has built a life I am genuinely proud of. He did not deserve to be a casualty of his wife's assumptions, so I was careful, I was thorough, and I made sure that what I did served the truth rather than simply my feelings, which are, in the end, not the same thing. On the 14th day, I called my attorney. Her name is Catherine Oze. I have worked with Catherine for 16 years, since a tenant dispute that she resolved with such efficiency and fairness that I sent her a handwritten note afterward, which she has framed, she tells me, on the wall of her office. Catherine is 55, precise, and has the quality of someone who measures her words carefully because she understands that precision is a form of respect. I told Catherine everything, what I had heard in the hallway, the lease expiration date, my concern for Marcus, what I wanted to achieve and what I was not willing to sacrifice in achieving it. Catherine listened without interrupting. What is the current rent for SB? She asked. I told her. It was $1,200 a month, the market rate for a comparable unit in that building and neighborhood, as of the most recent comparable analysis, was $2,100 a month. I had been subsidizing Marcus and Diane's housing by $900 every month for 2 years without telling either of them, because Marcus had been between projects when they moved in and I had not wanted him to feel the stress of market rent while he was re-establishing himself. Does Marcus know the building is yours? Catherine asked. He knows I own property, I said. He has never specifically asked about this building. I have never told him. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Manju. So both of them have been living in your building, at a subsidized rate, for 2 years, without knowing they were your tenants. Correct. And Diane believes you are dependent on Marcus. That is the narrative she has constructed. Yes. And Catherine made a note. Margaret, what do you want to happen? I had thought about this carefully. Lumdies, I want the truth to be known, I said. Not as a weapon, as a correction. I want Diane to understand what she said and what it was said about. And I want the lease situation addressed because I am not willing to continue subsidizing a household where I am described as a beggar, And Marcus needs to know the truth about his mother. He has always had a version of it, but not the full picture. I think he deserves the full picture. I paused. I want to tell him myself before anything formal happens. Catherine nodded. Then let's plan this in the right sequence. I called Marcus on a Saturday morning. I asked if he could come for lunch, alone. Not unusual. We had lunch together every few weeks, sometimes with Diane, sometimes just the two of us. He came at noon. I made soup, because I am not going to stop making soup because someone called me a beggar for doing so. We ate. We talked about his project, about his sister Carolyn in Atlanta, about the book he was reading, and then over coffee I told him not everything at once. In sequence, the way you build a complete picture from its parts, I told him about the building on Creston Avenue, that I had bought it in Itzenjubit, that it was the first property I had acquired and the one I had named my management company after, that it had been well managed for 40 years and was currently fully occupied. Marcus listened with the particular attention he brings to structural information, assembling it, testing it for load-bearing capacity. Pan unit, CB, I said. He looked at me. You own the building, he said. Not a question. An understanding arriving. Mend, I own the building, I said. You and Diane have been my tenants for 2 years. I set the rent below market when you moved in because you were between projects and I did not want you under financial pressure. I did not tell you because I did not want it to change anything between us. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I watched him process it, the restructuring of a fact he thought he knew. "And why are you telling me now?" he asked. I told him about the Wednesday afternoon, the hallway, the soup, what I had heard through the wall. His face did something complex that I will not try to fully describe. It moved through several things quickly. Embarrassment, anger, something that might have been grief at the version of his mother he had allowed to exist unchallenged in his household. "Blinja's mom," he said. "I am not telling you to create a problem between you and Diane," I said. "I am telling you because the truth is a better foundation than a comfortable misunderstanding. And because I am not a beggar, Marcus. I have never been a beggar, and I need the people in my life to know that." Bland, he reached across the table and put his hand over mine. "I know," he said. "I have always known." "Ben, she didn't," I said. "And that needs to change." The lease renewal conversation happened 10 days later. Catherine sent the formal lease renewal notice to Unit CB on a Thursday. It was a standard notice professionally drafted on Creston Avenue property management letterhead. It offered a renewal at the market rate of $2,100 per month, an increase of $900 from the current subsidized rate, effective at the end of the 63-day period. It was signed, as all my management correspondence is signed, by me, Margaret Eloise Creston, owner. Ben Deanne received it and called Marcus at work. Marcus told me later that she had called him 3 times in 20 minutes. The first call was confusion. There must be a mistake. Someone named Creston had sent a lease renewal. Did he know anything about this? The second call was agitation. The increase was enormous. This couldn't be right. Who was this Creston woman? The third call was silence on her end when Marcus told her, quietly and without drama, that Creston was his mother's name and the building was his mother's property, and the woman she had called a beggar in front of her friends on Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks ago, was the person who owned the apartment they slept in every night. Blungzi, he told me the silence lasted 11 seconds. He counted. Diane came to my apartment on a Saturday. She came alone. She called ahead, which I respected. She arrived at 2 o'clock with nothing in her hands. No flowers, no food, no prop to give her something to do with the awkwardness. Just herself, in a good coat, standing at my door with an expression that was not quite shame and not quite apology, but was in the territory of both and was clearly costing her something. I opened the door and let her in. I made tea. I put out the good cups, the ones from the cabinet that Diane had probably never noticed because they are not the fashionable style but are bone china from Itzenjubit liquors that belonged to my mother and are worth more than anything in Diane's kitchen. We sat at the table. She said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "Yes, what I said was wrong. It was cruel and it was wrong, and I said it because—" She stopped, tried again. "I said it because I had built an idea of you that was wrong and I had never questioned it, and I should have." She looked at her hands. "I should have asked Marcus. I made assumptions." You made assumptions based on what you could see," I said. "I take the bus. I bring soup. I live in a modest apartment. By your measure, these are the markers of someone without resources. Bane, she looked up at that. She heard the precision in it, the description of her measure, not mine. Bend, they are not accurate markers, she said. No, I said, they are not. I poured the tea. Diane, I said, I grew up without money. My parents rented their entire lives. Every decision they made was subject to someone else's decision about the property they lived in. I became a bookkeeper, and I saved years, and I bought my first building when I was 31 years old, and I have made careful decisions about property for 43 years since. I live modestly because I have never confused spending money with having it. I take the bus because I live in a city with adequate public transportation, and I did not survive 4 decades of careful decisions by spending money I do not need to spend. And I looked at her directly. I own 5 buildings in Cincinnati. The one you live in is the first one I ever bought. I have been subsidizing your rent by $900 a month for 2 years because Marcus was reestablishing himself, and I did not want you both under financial pressure. I paused. I have never asked Marcus for money. I have never needed Marcus for money. The only thing I have ever wanted from my son is what I have always had, his time and his love and his phone call on Sunday. Diane's eyes were bright in a way she was managing carefully. I didn't know, she said. Bon, you didn't ask, I said. That is different from not knowing. Asking was available to you. She absorbed that. The lease renewal, she said carefully. The market rate, Grino, is the market rate, I said. I subsidized the rent for 2 years because it served Marcus. I am not willing to continue subsidizing a household where I am referred to as a beggar. I kept my voice level. That is not revenge, Diane. It is a boundary. They are different things. She nodded slowly. Something in her face had shifted, not collapsed, not broken, but genuinely restructured. The visible process of a person revising a foundational assumption. What happens now? She asked. Belinda, that depends, I said, on what kind of relationship you want with your husband's mother. I will tell you honestly that the answer to that question has been uneven. Diane is not a person who changes quickly. She is thorough and she is proud, and the revision of a deeply held assumption requires time and repeated contact with evidence that the assumption was wrong. We have had 4 conversations in the 5 months since the Saturday tea. They have been progressively more genuine, which is progress, and I am not a person who requires speed from processes that deserve their own pace. Marcus and I have lunch every 3 weeks. He brings the soup now, sometimes. He makes his grandmother's recipe, which I taught him in, Arsène Sherbet, and he brings it in the same kind of reused containers I have always used, and I think he does this intentionally. He is a good man. The lease for CB was renewed at market rate. They stayed. I did not expect them to leave. Market rate in that neighborhood is still reasonable, and the building is well maintained, and they know now that the maintenance will be handled with the care of an owner who has looked after it for 40 years. But the stay was their decision, made with full information, which is the only kind of decision that counts. Please, here is what I learned at 70 years old. Modesty is not the same as poverty. They look similar from the outside to people who have learned to read wealth through its performance. They are entirely different things. One is a choice, one is a circumstance. The confusion between them belongs to the person making it, not to you. Blanche, you are not obligated to correct every misunderstanding immediately. Some misunderstandings correct themselves when the truth becomes unavoidable. Patience is not passivity. It is the strategic choice to let reality do the work when reality is fully capable of doing it. Subsidize with intention and withdraw with clarity. What I gave Marcus was a gift, offered freely and without expectation. When the conditions changed, When the gift was being offered in a household where I was diminished, it was entirely appropriate to withdraw it. Generosity requires a context of basic respect. That is not a high bar, it is the lowest bar. Bonds and know what you own, know it completely, know its value, its history, its documentation. Not because you intend to use it as a weapon, but because the truth of what you have built is the foundation of everything else. When someone builds a false story about who you are, the truth of what you have built is what corrects it. I am a bookkeeper's daughter who bought her first building at 31 with 9 years of savings. I am a woman who has made careful decisions for 43 years, while taking the bus and wearing comfortable shoes and making soup in reused containers. I am the owner of 5 properties in Cincinnati, Ohio, including the one where my daughter-in-law called me a beggar. I was never a beggar, I was never even close, and now everyone who needs to know that knows it. I was 70 years old when I stood in that hallway with soup in my hands and heard what my daughter-in-law said about me. And I was 70 years old when I went home, put the soup in the refrigerator, and called my property manager. I am 70 years old this morning, sitting in my apartment on Harmon Street, drinking my tea from my mother's bone china, looking out at the Cincinnati morning, living the life I built with 43 years of patient, careful, unglamorous work. Dandy Ann called me a beggar. She was standing in my building when she said it. Means she did not know that yet. Now she does. What would you have done in that hallway? Would you have knocked on the door? Or done what I did and gone home and let the truth find its own moment? Tell me in the comments. And tell me which city you are watching from today. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who has been underestimated, misjudged, measured by the wrong standard by someone who never thought to ask a single question. Belda from Stories of Margaret, thank you for being here with me. Know what you own. Know who you are, and never let anyone else's ignorance define either one. Never.